Welcome to another Parallel Project Training podcast. Today we're going to do the PPQ, and I'm really delighted that Tom O'Shea's decided to join us for this podcast. Tom O'Shea is going to be leading our PPQ programs from now on. I've known Tom for many, many years. So Tom, why don't you introduce yourself to the people and tell them what you know about PPQ and your involvement as a PPQ assessor?
Yeah, certainly. So I've been involved in PPQ from the outset. I was actually involved in the previous version at this level, which was something called the PQ, and that was a 2-day assessment centre. So fortunately, the PPQ is a little bit easier than that in that it's now just a half-day assessment in effect. But I've been involved from the beginning in the pilot, setting up the process and confirming or evaluating the structure of the assessment, and have been undertaking assessments ever since. In addition to that, I also do some guidance and coaching of people through the process and how to present evidence, the kinds of things that are expected of a PPQ assessment, and the best way to prepare.
Fantastic. So you basically seen the inside of how candidates do well and not so well, and the hints and tips that they can do. So that's what we wanted to capture in this series of podcasts. I suppose we better explain what the PPQ is, really. I see it as the bridge between the knowledge and understanding that you get in project management qualification and that sort of advanced technical knowledge that you need to get your chartered status. So it provides a route to chartered. So I think that's why most people come on this program, but looking to work towards chartered status, I think.
Yes, indeed. Although the PPQ is, recognised in itself and is something worth having just almost as a standalone, if you like, to show that you have developed an advanced level of competence and capability in delivering projects. And I think that's a key thing that differentiates it from the PMQ that you mentioned. The PMQ is very much about knowledge. It's about learning some stuff, some theories and techniques and tools and processes, and then being able to write theoretical answers to exam questions. PPQ is very much about application. So within the PPQ, you are expected to demonstrate to the assessors that you can actually run a project by applying your knowledge to the case study. So you have to approach this as a project manager, not as a student candidate in an exam. You have to approach this as if you are actually about to go into this organisation or have just gone into this organisation to deliver a project.
Yeah, so the assessment's based on a case study, isn't it?
Yes.
So you get a case study 4 weeks before your assessment, and you have to put yourself into the feet of the project manager who's coming in to run that case study. And most of them seem to be turnaround situations where a project has not been managed effectively, and you have to think about what steps and measures you would implement in order to bring that project back into control.
Yeah, it's always going to be a situation that a project or projects are not being run well. There's no point in putting somebody into a situation where everything's perfect, because all you do is pick up the reins and carry on. What this assessment is looking for is for you to use your knowledge and experience to say, well, I can see what's gone wrong here and what I need to do moving forward. So it is very much about the application.
Yeah, it was quite interesting, actually, because when I did my assessment, I read the case study first of all, and they did a reasonably good job. It was... they had some meetings and they had some plans and actions and stuff like that. And then I did an analysis against each of the assessment criteria. I said, what are they doing about change control? What are they doing about planning? What are they doing about risk management? And they scored 0 on every single one of the assessment criteria. So it was really interesting. Superficially, it looked like your typical project,
Yeah.
But when you looked into each of the assessment criteria, there was almost nothing. There was no project management in there. No formal project management in the case study at all. Lots of meetings, lots of workshops, but no actual risk registers, change logs.
Yeah, so there is stuff happening.
Yeah,
but it's just not happening in a controlled, disciplined way.
Yeah. So it's quite interesting. So it's a case study. You put yourself into the position of the project manager taking over that case study. Now there you've got lots of choices about how you would manage that project, because project management is quite a broad church, isn't it? So this qualification is about understanding that broad church and taking the decisions about what you would do first. We're all very busy, the team's very busy. Which elements would we do first against each of the assessment criteria?
Yeah.
So it's assessed in a couple of ways, isn't it? There's a scenario, an oral, and a written report. So let's talk about each of those. So what's the scenario like? What's that entail?
The scenario is where you, as the new PM in this organization, are going to sit down with the sponsor.
Yeah.
So you have a meeting.
Yeah.
So you're going to be asked to consider something, a specific situation, which is the task that you're given. And you're going to be asked to have a think for 10 minutes about how you're going to approach this meeting with the sponsor. And then you will go into that meeting. So one of the assessors will be the sponsor and you are going to be you.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes referred to as a role play, but there is another term that's probably more appropriate, which is real play, in that you are really you. You're not pretending to be someone else.
Yeah.
So you've got to set out to the sponsor how you're going to address the specific task that's been set out in that brief.
And it's generally around stakeholders or reporting to senior managers?
We'll talk about the syllabus and the learning outcomes in a bit more detail shortly, but essentially there are 4 particular learning outcomes that could be addressed in the scenario. One of them is always covered, which is communication, because that is a key skill that a project manager needs to be able to demonstrate. But then the other 3 will be around possibly having a negotiation, but it could also be about solving a problem, or it could be about establishing reporting and hierarchies and making decisions in particular.
Yeah.
So they could be in relation to a change. They could be in relation to another situation that is in the scenario. But one way or another, it's designed to get you to have a think about the specifics of something that already exists in the case study. So just to clarify, this is not throwing you into a completely brand new situation that you know nothing about in the case study. It's building on or extending from something that you already know about. And you are expected to set out how you're going to address this particular element. And as part of that, discuss how you're going to manage the communication of your resolution or the way forward that you propose.
We got some feedback from the APM on this one, actually, and they said that you should also think about what other resources the organisation can give you. Is there any expert advice, or is there any additional people within the organisation who could advise you on how to overcome the problem? So who else would you need to consult? So it's not just a matter of solving it there on the spot. You might need to say, well, I need to consult procurement, or I need to go and talk to a HR specialist, or I need to go and talk to a health and safety expert to bring in their views in this situation, So you're not sort of expected to be the expert on everything.
Absolutely. You've only been in the organisation a matter of days or possibly weeks. So you will be starting to get to grips with who's who in the organisation and where the different skills and expertise lie, but you don't or probably won't have the answers. And if you think about it from a senior manager's perspective, if you had somebody sat in front of you that suddenly told you all of the things, you must do this and you must do that, you're probably not going to receive it very well.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is actually making a case for doing something. And that's important to bear in mind through all of these moving forward, is that you don't just come in and say, you do it this way because it's best practice. To set out the reasoning why the sponsor, or in the later parts, the assessor, would need to think about doing things in a certain way and why it's relevant for this organisation and this project to do it this way.
So this you just treat like a meeting with your boss.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
You're just going in for a meeting with your boss. Your boss has said, right, you've got a new project. Here's the project. And you've got to go and just treat it, as seriously as you would a meeting with your boss, really.
Yeah. The one difference is this is a new boss that you don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas, if you go into your current boss, you're going to know what they need to know or what they want to hear from you. With this one, you're starting from scratch. So you have to assume that they don't know a huge amount about the tools and techniques that you're going to be talking about and why they should do things in that way. So you're there to convince them.
And you have to take into account the maturity of the project there.
Absolutely, yeah.
For instance, working in a case study.
Yeah. So you would be doing most of the talking in this part, but it is very much a meeting. So the assessor is going to be asking you questions. They're going to be giving you bits of information to engage in conversation. Maybe, if there's something you're suggesting, well, if we could do this or could do that, they may have a preference or a priority.
Yeah.
But it's all designed to be like a real meeting.
I think I was asked, how would I get the project delivered on cost, which I've been asked many times. And slightly more aggressive ways than the assessor did, actually, thinking about it.
Yeah, probably, yeah. They're not going to be aggressive with you in this. So they're not going to suddenly start thumping the table being Mr. or Mrs. Angry.
Yeah.
They're just going to be, an assessor in a regular meeting.
And of course, the answer that they want is fairly common project management. Anyway, let's move on.
Okay.
So that moves on to the oral assessment. So this is different. This is where they introduce this critically analyse and critically evaluate thing. So they're looking at different options. Is that right?
That's right, yeah. So the oral exam is 4 formal questions, each of which has 3 parts, and it lasts around 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Now, whereas the scenario is a meeting with a sponsor, this is a bit more like having some external consultants or auditors or something coming in and asking you questions on a more formal basis about the project. But the approach is still the same in that you've got to think about the situation as it currently stands and apply your answers to what has happened in the case study.
Yeah.
So again, the assessors don't want to hear theory. If they're asking you about risk or change or something like that, they don't want to know the 5 steps in a risk management process according to the PRAM guide. They want to know, well, what you're going to do. So how are you going to apply this? What are the ways you could do it? What are the ways for some of the questions that you will do it? So as you say, some of the questions will be critically evaluate, some will be critically analyse, but we'll talk about the difference between those in a moment.
Yeah. So the difference between that and the written report, apart from it being written, is that you get 3 questions they're all on the same topic, aren't they?
Yes, they are. So in the oral exam, you have the 4 questions I mentioned, each has 3 parts.
Yeah.
Once you finish those, you leave that part of the assessment and you go onto a different platform where you don't engage with anyone. It's all controlled by the system. Anyone who's done PMQ recently will know all about how that works. But essentially, you are shown a brief in the written report and you have 1 3-part question. So it'll be the same kind of structure as the oral exam, but around 1 question only.
Yeah.
And then it sort of also borrows from the scenario approach in that you get given the brief and a bit more information about the situation and then asked to write your answer to the 3 parts of the question. So you get 15 minutes essentially to read and make some notes, etc., and then an hour to write your report.
So the question might be about change control or governance or benefits management. In fact, if they look in the syllabus, it indicates which topics are going to be potentially written assessments, doesn't it?
Yeah, so some topics could be an oral question or a report. So, for example, change control could be in the oral part or it could be in the written report, whereas some other topics would be oral only or written only. Like you mentioned benefits there, that's a written question only. You're never going to get an oral question on that.
And the key thing in the written report is you'll get 3 parts to that question. So it'll be about benefits management. It'll be 3 separate parts all about benefits management.
Yeah, each of which will be based on an assessment criterion in the syllabus.
Yeah. You don't get a choice, do you? You just get like a question.
No, that's it. That's the question. So there's no choice.
Yeah, it's tough, I think.
Yeah, it is. It is a little bit tough in that respect.
Because you can't go, it's not like the PMQ where you can go, well, there's 16 topics and I'll ignore discounted cash flow because it's too hard. You can't say, actually, I'm not going to answer that question on benefits management. I'm going to do another one.
No, but yeah, that's right. You don't have an option like that. But if you got brought into an organisation to run a project, you don't get to pick and choose which parts of the project you run and which ones you don't.
That's a very good point. Yes, you have to do it all.
You do.
You do. Right. Good. So we've got any hints and tips? Oh, let's talk about what critically analyse and critically evaluate is first, actually. So
yeah,
because these are quite, as in the APM generally, these are quite specific definitions, aren't they?
Yes.
So critically analyse, critically evaluate and demonstrate. So let's go through analyse first. Critically analyse.
Okay. So in terms of the command verbs, the critically analyse and critically evaluate are relevant to the oral and the written part. So the difference between them is that in analyse, what you have to do is think about 2 different approaches, tools, techniques, 2 different ways of undertaking or dealing with a situation and give the pros and cons or the benefits and drawbacks advantages, disadvantages of each of those approaches.
Yeah.
With Evaluate, you have to set up, or you have to provide a recommendation on what you're going to do to move forward. Now, most Evaluate questions will require you to provide 2 options and then make a recommendation on which one.
Yeah.
There are some Evaluates that only require one way, but you also then have to do something additional, like explaining the importance of doing something as well.
Yeah.
Okay, but no specific recommendation is required. They also use the term in the explanatory notes that you can come to a finding.
Yeah.
Okay, so your finding might be that in this particular case, it's important to do this because.
Yeah.
Okay, but the key thing with Evaluate is to, in a similar sort of way to analyze, you have to think about the way in which you could manage something. And then if it's a minimum 2, make a recommendation on which one you would prioritize or take forward.
I think a lot of people find this quite challenging. Because they come from a background where they might work in a large corporate and there's a prescribed method to do something.
Yes.
And so when you say, can you consider 2 ways of doing something, they struggle to identify those options.
Yeah, so if you take something like change control, many people coming into the PPQ come from a pretty mature, well-established project environment, and change control process is defined.
Yeah.
So you have something there in place, you know what the process is, you know how it's going to work. What you have to think about when you go into the case study project is you're going into a very different environment. You're going into one that doesn't have anything defined in terms of a process or templates or even any kind of sort of structured approach to things. They certainly don't have a PMO that you can turn to for advice and guidance. So now what you have to think about is, well, how am I going to, for example, introduce change control? Now, you might think, well, I'll just do it the way I've always done it. I'll take the best elements of the change control process that I've used before. But if it's asking you for 2 approaches, then that's where people sometimes get stumped. What you also have to think about is, what's the context here? What's the situation I'm coming into? You know, what would be appropriate given the challenges that already exist in this project? Is it something that requires a very quick and simple solution that I can adopt and run with immediately? Or is it something that actually requires a far more disciplined, controlled approach, because what's happened so far has been really poor and they've really got to get this sorted properly moving forward?
Yeah, and I think when you think about different approaches, you can think about the process, the tools and the techniques that you're going to use. Because quite often people say, I would set up an Excel register.
Yeah.
But that's a tool, that's not a technique or a process, you know. So I think what you have to think about, I would establish a risk register or a change log, and I could do that in Excel or I could do that on a database. But the technique is establishing a change log. And so I say to people, don't, I almost like ban the word Excel because setting up an Excel spreadsheet is not a project management technique.
No, and nor is a risk register or, you know, an issue log, whatever. And, you know, just as a Gantt chart isn't a project plan.
Yeah.
So
2 tools, techniques and theories. So it's not just about the tool. And I think that's what catches people out a lot of time. They talk a lot about the tools, but they don't talk much about the techniques or the theory behind it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, so it might be that you know, a simple spreadsheet is the answer to a particular tool that would manage a part of the process, but it might be that you need something much more sophisticated. But just simply having a change register or a risk register in itself doesn't give you better change control or risk management.
Yeah, so I'd establish a change management process. I'd probably document that in a 1-page change procedure.
Yeah.
And support that with a change log, which I could run in either Excel or I could set up a SharePoint site or whatever. But
yeah,
I think the other thing I found useful is one of my clients has something called level of control. So they talk about highly complex, medium complex, low complexity projects, and they have more formal project management processes for the more complex and larger projects. For example, a high level of control project would have full earned value and a program maintained by a PMO and that sort of stuff. Whereas a small simple project might be controlled with milestones and a simple milestone tracker and wouldn't have a fully developed project management plan. You'd have a sort of lighter, simpler project management plan. So I think it's useful to think about, where does this project fit on that spectrum?
Yeah.
Is it a small, simple 2-person project? Is it a medium complexity project where you'll have, you know, a mixture of something? Or is it that high infrastructure, complicated, multi-organizational project, and there's no point suggesting that you have the whole Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah. But equally, you have to think about the context or the situation of the project right now. Is it running smoothly and everyone knows what they're doing, or is it late and over budget and you've got an inexperienced team? That's also going to shape the recommendations that you make.
Yeah.
The other command verb then is demonstrate, but the demonstrate command verb is only relevant to the scenario meeting with the sponsor. So there are only 4 learning outcomes that are covered in that meeting. And demonstrate is showing by practical means. So the mere fact that you are discussing with the sponsor how you're going to approach the situation is you demonstrating by practical means.
Yeah. So you're not required to do critical evaluate during that scenario. Does anyone ever do that during that scenario?
They sometimes do fall into it. The syllabus is a little bit misleading in that in one of the learning outcomes, a couple of the criteria have got evaluate in there rather than demonstrate, but actually it's the overall expectation is that you are demonstrating only.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so just approach that. You can almost ignore that command verb altogether. As long as you understand critically evaluate, critically analyze, then you'll be able to deal with the oral and the written parts effectively, and demonstrate you'll just do, as I said, by having that meeting with the sponsor and talking through and presenting your thoughts and ideas and observations on what's happened and how to go forward.
So you've seen quite a lot of candidates go through. What would be the top tip you would give them, or your key tips that you think you would give them?
I think 2 things. One is be the project manager. Don't approach this as, the PM should, or some kind of external perspective on what's gone on. Just immerse yourself in it and be the PM and think about what you would have done or how you would take this forward. So, you can read that. You said earlier that you looked at the case study and you thought, oh, this seems to be going okay. But when you apply your knowledge and experience to it, you think, actually, no, they've missed a bit here and they've done something wrong there. Or that could be far better. That's what you've got to be thinking about is, well, if I was running it, this is what I'll do.
Yeah.
And the second part is always keep your recommendations, your observations tied back into the case study. Theory is not going to get you anything. Well, it'll get you a few marks. It might help you to give a structure to your answer, but just giving a theory is not going to be sufficient. So as I said before, you're sitting in front of somebody that you need to convince them why in their organization that you've joined, why they should be adopting stuff that you're bringing with you. And it's not just because it's best practice to do it. I want to know practical, sound reasoning why I should do what you're recommending.
Yeah. So focus on practical solutions to the problems.
Drawn from the case study.
Drawn from that case study.
Yeah, that's the key thing is it's always tied back into things that have happened or perhaps not happened in the case study and the consequences of that and build on that.
Yeah, brilliant. Any other tips, comments?
I think we'll cover off more tips and hints as we go through the remaining topic areas in the podcast.
Thank you, Tom. Really good overview.